case, I better crack on. So I'm just going to carry on with this slide, which is welcome everyone to the agenda points on this as well. Thank you for picking me up on that, Rachel. Much appreciated. Funnily enough, on one of our other systems, which is leading virtual teams, we look at the difficulties of WebExes when people are on mute as well. Today we're looking at two broad areas. The first one is what is resilience and why it's important, and linked in with that is looking particularly at resilience with change. We're all experiencing quite a lot of change at the moment, and leading our teams through change and understanding how we react to change as well can be a particularly useful thing. The second element is the actual physical stuff, the biological stuff of what's happening to us under stress, and a three-step framework for how to recognize that, respond to it correctly so we get a little bit of space, and ultimately resolve the issues that are causing us stress. So that's broadly what we're going to look at. A couple of quick things about WebExes and virtual sessions first of all, though. Now, we have 178 people online with us at the moment. That means we've set it up so you all enter the WebEx on mute. Unfortunately, the background noise can be quite horrific if we don't do that. However, please unmute yourself at any point. Feel free to ask a question, shout out a comment, even have a disagreement. Through disagreement, we grow. I'm always happy to have a question fired at me at any point. It's always a positive thing. One of the best ways for us to communicate through this session is with the chat box. So here's our first bit of interactivity, and I am going to be asking you to type in one-word answers a fair bit as we go through this session. Can I ask you first of all, please, to open up the chat tab, select everyone as your send to option, all entire audience, and type in a very quick hello for me. So let's see if we can get 177 odd hellos coming through. Let's get everyone to do that if you would. So open up the chat box and type in lots and lots and lots of hellos to all entire audience. Give that a go for me if you can now. Brilliant, lovely. Let's get lots more going. Okay, try that for me if you can, guys. I'm not seeing that, so make sure your all and entire audience is selected. That makes sure that everyone else can see your hellos as well. Okay, and we'll carry on anyway, regardless of whether people are using the chat box as well. One of the things you can do when you type into the chat box is you can ask a question, and Rachel's, who's on with me at the moment, will be collating those questions so we can have a look at them at the end, or we can get back to you after this as well. Now, one final thing that makes a virtual session really work well is simply taking notes. We're going to cover through a lot of information, so try and make sure you've got a pen and pad in front of you and make down any notes that you want to, which is great. Okay, I can see a question that's popped up in the question box saying, is this a chat box? It can be used as one. Where you've got questions, you can type in questions, but also where you've got the chat tab, you can type in chat as well there. Let's dive straight in. So the first thing we're going to do is have a little chat about what is resilience and why do we need it. A lot of people feel that resilience is about how tough you are. It's not. In fact, you can get some quite good insights about resilience and toughness from their physical descriptions in terms of engineering and physics. In engineering, a material's toughness is its ability to withstand energy or shock without fracturing. Now, I think that's a pretty good description for mental toughness as well myself. Resilience, however, is a material's ability to regain its initial shape, form, or structure after tension or pressure. So on the one side, toughness is what we can stand in the short term. Resilience is our ability to get back to normal. The good news is with resilience is it's not always something that has to be an innate skill. It can be learned. It can be developed. In fact, the more we do it, the more it impacts our mental toughness and the stronger and more resilient we get as we go through. So this is an important element for leaders in particular, because leaders, of course, we need to look after others. That leads us to 3 quick guides on why resilience is so incredibly important if you're a leader or a manager of others. Firstly, if you are able to look after yourself, then you stand a better chance of being able to look after others. Recently, I ran a session for an HR team, a group of HR business partners, and the difficulty was that they were all working incredibly hard and therefore not able to look after themselves. That meant then that their productivity, their work ethics, everything else start to just slowly be degraded. Look after yourself and you can be in a position to look after others. The second thing is you are role modeling behaviors. Whenever we act in a particularly strong, positive way, equally if we act in a worrying, stressed, or anxious way, I'm sure you've all been in teams yourselves where you've seen the impact that that can have on the team. The fact is the leader's mood, the leader's approach, the leader's resilience has a big impact on the rest of the team as well. Now, you probably already knew that. It's just nice to reflect on this a little bit, because when we're looking at resilience a little bit later in terms of those 3 steps, the first one we're going to look at is when to check that you might need some help. Really key point that we'll come to later. But remember, if you don't look after yourself, you can't look after others as well. Okay, let's have a look at why resilience needs to play such an important part in change. And in particular, first of all, why and how people respond in particular ways to change. Now, I know that we've got a number of L&D leads and L&D staff, etc., on this WebEx. So I'm quite sure that you guys are all very familiar with the typical transition curve and how people respond to change. But it's always worthwhile bearing in mind that this stuff seems to be hardwired. Through most of our human evolution, being wary of things that are a little bit different has done us some quite good turns. Now, in the modern day, that can really trip us up. And in fact, I'd invite you, if you're curious about this kind of stuff, to maybe just Google these quick 2 terms. We teach a lot of what we call System 1 and System 2 psychology. These are little bias points, the ways that our mind works. One of the ones that I'm fascinated by, particularly when we're looking at resilience and change, is something called familiarity bias. Now, with familiarity bias, we are all more comfortable with what we are familiar with. That's a generalization, a big, broad generalization. So I'm sure there'll be times when that's not true, when you see this wonderful, beautiful new flavor of ice cream that you've never tried before, but you're sure it's going to taste amazing. There will be exceptions to this. However, in general, us humans give a higher value and feel more comfortable with things that we are familiar with. So whenever we're in an unfamiliar situation, we can start to feel wary. And that's an important word that we're going to look at later when we look at what can trigger our stress response. Something else as well is an interesting bias called the sunken cost fallacy. Now, this says the more we invest our time, effort, energy, emotion, or resources into something, the more we want it to succeed. Sounds quite sensible, doesn't it? It comes down to the old gambler's fallacy of you've got to know when to stick and know when to fold. Us humans, as a big, broad generalization, we are rubbish at knowing when to fold. We hold on to the familiar, even when it may not be the best thing for us to do. Now, there's a lot more information you can find out around familiarity bias, sunken cost fallacy, and a whole host of what we call holistic algorithms or heuristic algorithms. Feel free to wiki them, Google them, or use any other big search engine that you'd like to. The key thing is that most of us are, unfortunately, generally resistant to change. So with this in mind, what we're going to do is have a quick look at the good old-fashioned transition curve. Now, again, I'm wary that we have a lot of HR and L&D people on. I'd be very surprised if this was the first time you were seeing this curve, but hopefully I can give you a couple of quick ways to speed through this curve. First of all, if you're not familiar with this, let me run through it with a couple of quick examples. We'll take an example of a round of redundancies being announced at work. So a horrible, bad, negative, terrible change. Obviously, it's going to upset people. It's interesting how different people go through this curve, though. We'll also do a change of an IT system, a process, or a way of working, because that does seem quite relevant at the moment. Now, when the first announcement happens, or the first time that we experience or detect that the change may be coming, we all know what happens. The first thing, general shock, and that's quickly followed by denial. And you'll notice on the curve that our happiness and productivity has just gone up a little bit with denial. Well, that's because it feels good. Ignorance is a wonderful, warm security blanket. I remember about 15 years ago being asked to consult on some large redundancies that were happening. And it was interesting watching people basically saying, no, no, it'll never happen. They'll never do it. That's the denial stage right there. It's the same with a new system, process, or way of working. First of all, shock, and then, no, that wouldn't happen to us. We wouldn't engage with that. Our senior managers wouldn't take it on. It wouldn't work for us. Denial feels good. However, eventually, after the denial, once the message has become a little bit clearer, we start to get a little bit of emotion. General reticence at the new process, system, or idea at the very least. If it's something big, like job losses, that's where we can get some really, really strong anger and frustration. It's called being a human being, and it's completely normal. As we go downwards through this curve, eventually we get to what's called unhappy acceptance, i.e. we have accepted that the new way of working, of doing, the new way of earning our money has changed. We're not happy about it, but we have accepted it. And at this point, as a leader or manager, this is the most difficult element in terms of leading the team, because everyone is at their low. No one seems to know what's going on. Everything's new and people are angry about everything. As we start to get used to the new process, the new system, the new way of working, eventually people start to come on board. This is often called the exploration stage. And I always remember the person who taught this to me about 20 years ago said, Nick, when people are doing this, imagine it's like they're dipping their toe in the water to see what the temperature's like. But the most valuable thing you can do as a change manager is to remember that people want the water to be too hot or too cold. Now that may sound strange, but here's the thing. If the water is too hot or too cold, well, that justifies all the anger and frustration and unhappiness of before. But what if the new process or system is actually better than the last one? What if the water temperature is just right? Well, then we have to do quite a big emotional change, and that doesn't always feel very comfortable. As people go through the exploration stage and they find their new way of doing things or engaging with the system, eventually we end up with integration and then productive and motivated. Now, here's the thing. This is a stylized curve based on an original Elizabeth Kubler-Ross curve that describes someone's reaction to a major change, which was death. It's a bit severe, isn't it? So in actual fact, in real life, this curve changes its amplitude an awful lot. That's how much it's going up and down and how wide the curve is and how quickly people go through it. And that's why at the bottom axis where it says time, there are no units. Some people can go through the change curve incredibly quickly, come out on the other side and be ready to embrace the new change. This can be true with something like a redundancy or a new system, process, or way of working. Other people can take so long, they can basically get stuck at the bottom. This is also true with things like redundancies, new systems, processes, or way of working. The transition curve simply says this, that we go up and down along this journey whenever we go through change. As a manager, as a leader, it's good to be able to think about how can I speed my people through this process so they end up at the productive and motivated at the end. So that's what we will do now. Let's have a quick look and break this curve down into 4 stages. And then from this, we can see some good options for leading in each of these stages. So stage 1, it's the shock and the denial. It's the first instant piece. Here's what we need to do. Reiterate that message again and again and again and again. About 12 or so years ago, I was involved in helping Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust, who were going through a big change because they were building a new hospital. Now, here's the thing. The nurses at the time didn't believe the new hospital was being built. The reason, it would cost hundreds of £1,000,000. And hey, we've already got a hospital. Parts of it are falling down, but surely it would be cheaper to just rebuild and refacilitate than build a new one. They were firmly in denial. And interestingly, they didn't come out of denial until the local newspaper carried images of the foundations actually being poured. So what we do in stage one is reiterate, reiterate, reiterate. Explain the why of the change. Help people see that it is happening. Stage two. This is where we get our initial outpouring of anger and frustration. Here's what not to do. Do not tell people everything's going to be okay and they should just get on board. One of the worst things we can do here. If you're frustrated, if you're annoyed, if you're angry and someone comes along and tells you to smile and get on board, how does it make you feel? So what we need to do here, actually, is allow that emotion to surface. Let people talk through their feelings. The quicker you can let them get it off their chest, the quicker you can start moving them through to unhappy acceptance and the exploration stages. And that is stage three. So this is where you may well have a team that's really split, actually. Some people could still be in stage two, some people could be in stage three. You may even well have some people in stage one and stage four at the same time. But if the majority of people are in stage three, you need to start gently encouraging them and passing them control. Ask them great coaching questions. How could we engage with this? What's the best way to do that? What advantage could you take from this situation? Start to slowly move them up that exploration ramp to integration, productive, and motivated, because in stage four, this is where we can pass full control over to them and start to generate our subject matter experts in the new process, system, environment, or way of working, and start to see people starting their new lives happy and positive given any kind of major change that has gone through. So there's our tips on the 4 stages. Remember, in theory, you can't really stop them going through those particular messages, those particular stages. What you can do is you can speed them through. Okay, we've got a nice little slide for you next, which is a summary of those 4 stages and how to recognize them and what to do. Now, I'm showing this to you at the moment. It's a very busy slide, but what we've done is we've put this on a 1-page summary. So at the end of this virtual session, your account manager will contact you or someone from ILX and they'll send over the 1-page summary for you. Okay, just nice to have that and for you to be able to reflect and explore at your leisure. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what we've done so far is explore the very traditional transition curve. Again, anyone who's experienced with change, anyone in L&D, I'm sure you've seen this many times. You already knew that we can't stop people going through it. That's the mantra that we all know. All you can do is speed people through it. Or can you? Well, the answer is actually, yes, you can. There are a number of ways to stop people going through that transition curve. Now, again, some people can go through it really quickly, but if there's a way that we can remove that transition curve and help people fully engage with change, isn't that a nice thing? So with this, I'm going to introduce you to something called the 4 laws of change. Here we go. Law 1, nice and simple. You already knew this. Change is constant. Every second you are breathing, the world is spinning and a new technology is being invented somewhere. The world is in constant change. All that seems to have really changed is our focus on how we are in change. Admittedly, this is definitely a big change at the moment, but still, change is constant. And you know what? That can kind of be reassuring at times. Law 2, change can be positive, negative, or even both at the same time. Now, until recently, there were some big proposals to build a new runway at Heathrow. That got halted a few months ago. Now, if you work at Heathrow, if your business relies on the success of Heathrow, if you pay your mortgage because of Heathrow, then a new runway at Heathrow would have probably been a pretty good thing for you. More business, more secure, more profits, it's great. However, if you live near Heathrow, if you value your environment in your garden and you like to sunbathe, then maybe the extra runway really wouldn't have been that great. But what if you work at Heathrow and you live near Heathrow? You pay your mortgage with your job at Heathrow, but also you like to sunbathe in the garden. The fact is that change is not innately positive or innately negative. It all depends where we're viewing it from. And that's where we get to the special bit with the 4 laws of change. Law 3. If you create the change, generally, you'll embrace it. But if change happens to you, then generally, we'll resist it. So here's the tip for leading change. Don't lead change. Empower others to find a solution to a challenge that just happens to take them on a journey. It's far more effective, far more powerful, and I'm just going to share a quick experiment that started to show just how powerful this could be. Some years ago, I was running a leadership program for a large insurer. They gave me permission to use some of their people as guinea pigs. We had 12 people in a training session, and what we did was we split them into 2 groups of 6. Both groups had to make an origami box, which took 6 steps. The groups were taken into different rooms after they'd been shown how to make the origami box. Group A were asked, "What will your team name be?" Okay, brilliant. Now, here's your task. Over the next half an hour, we want you to make as many origami paper boxes as possible. How will you go about doing it? Now, we did this experiment a number of times, and invariably, the first team did this. They organized themselves into a 4-desk manufacturing kind of production line. Often they moved desks and tables, assigned themselves into positions, each person did a task, and they produced a large number of origami paper boxes. Whatever they chose to do, we took that system, model, or idea and forced it on Team B. Team B, we told them what their team name was. We gave them the challenge, the same challenge. We then told them exactly how to do it. And all we did was duplicate perfectly from Team A. And yet Team B, who were using the same systems and processes, generally produced 20% less of the origami boxes. We swapped it around the next day, by the way, and asked them to make origami paper balloons. This time swapped around, so Team B makes all the choices and Team A has those choices forced upon them. And once again, roughly a 20% difference in success and production. If you create the change, if you get to choose, then you get to have power. And power makes us feel good. It makes us feel motivated. It engages us with what's going on. If a change is forced upon you, generally we feel powerless and we start to resist. So law 3, wherever possible, use a coaching approach, use challenge and objectives to help people embrace a change and create it instead of have it happening to them. Now, law 4 is just a little bit of reassurance. Anything that's used or experienced enough times will stop being a change and will start to become the norm. The fact is that all the lovely changes that we're going through now in terms of virtual working and home working in 2 or 3 years' time, it will be the norm. I remember when there was no Wi-Fi. And I also remember how quickly that became an absolutely embedded part of our daily lives as well. Imagine going to a hotel with no Wi-Fi. Imagine working from home with no Wi-Fi. Okay, 4 laws of change, and in particular, law 3. How can we apply this back to the change curve? So there we go, our nice traditional change curve, and we want to try and coach people through this. So here are some key questions that can really help your people travel through this really quickly. Now, some years ago when I led a large change project, I had this printed up as an A1 poster and I hung it in my desk behind my chair. When people came in to see me, I would always ask them 3 questions and occasionally a 4th. And they were simply, where are you right now on the change curve? The second question, where do you want to be? Occasionally, people would say denial, in which case I'd simply ask them, are you sure? Generally, people would say they want to be productive and motivated, though. Why? Because that's the nicest place to be, isn't it? So the third question, what do you need to do to get there? Now, the number of times that the answer was not some really big complex map or route or project, it was simply, a 1 or 2 word answer such as get over it or get on with it. And it really was quite amazing. And by the way, I generally try to offer a 4th question as well. I didn't do this for everyone because some people like to be left alone at that point. But the 4th question, showing you're a decent leader, that you do actually give a damn about them. Is there anything I can do to help you? So what we're doing there is we're using a coaching approach to help people either go through that transition curve as quickly as possible, or even the 4 laws of change to help people skip the transition curve and just engage straight with the new piece or way of working as well. Okay, let's move on. Let's start to have a little bit of a bigger look at stress, resilience, what's happening on the biochemical levels, and ways to manage and control this. So first of all, what actually happens to us when we get stressed? Let's imagine a nice old traditional evolutionary system. You're walking through the woods and all of a sudden a bear jumps out at you. What happens? We have our fight or flight response kick in. I'm sure you've all heard of this before. We're going to have a little bit of a look at it. And before we move on, let's imagine another scenario as well. You're walking through the forest. It's 10,000 years ago. We're ancient humans, and you notice everything seems to be changing. There's some strange noises and strange music in the background coming from a source you've not recognized before. The ground and terrain seems to be changing. Your wariness increases. In both situations, your fight or flight situation response may be kicking in. And here's what's actually happening in this situation. The first thing is a threat is perceived. Now, that doesn't mean to say, by the way, there actually has to be a threat. Just the perception of a threat, just the perception of potential danger, for example, the unknown, is enough to start triggering our fight or flight, our stress response. And the first thing that happens is a whole load of neurotransmitters and hormones are released. And these change our physiology and how we're thinking. Probably the simplest way of putting this is that it increases the oxygen and nutrient flow to major organs in our body, such as our heart and our lungs. By the way, the heart and lungs are connected via the vagus nerve directly hardwired into your brain. If your heart beats fast, or if you take big gulping breaths of oxygen with your lungs, it sends a signal to your brain saying, we must be in danger. Make the fight or flight response kick in. So the fight or flight response can make these things kick in, which then kicks in the fight or flight response. Suddenly, we're in a vicious cycle that can feed off itself. A lot of oxygen and nutrients also gets rerouted to your major muscle groups, ready so that you can run or fight. It's where the system gets its name from. Now, while all that's happening, that oxygen, that nutrient flow, it needs to come from somewhere. Stuff is rerouted from your gut, your kidneys, your livers, your non-essential, ready for fight or flight systems. Your immune system starts to slow down. Now, this response is governed by a large number of different chemicals and neurotransmitters, but some of the perhaps more famous ones are things like adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol. Now, cortisol changes how we focus on things. It gives us a laser focus on the danger point. Something jumps out on you, you keep noticing it right away. You keep your eyes tracked on it. You notice the second it makes a twitch. The trouble is, that means all your periphery vision, your working complex memory is impaired. Cortisol, a key chemical released during our fight or flight response, actively reduces our ability to solve complex and difficult situations. Why? Because in a fight or flight, we don't need to solve complex and difficult situations. Oh, hang on a minute. The trouble is, stress at work normally means we do need to solve these problems. And that's why the stress response, as well as being very physically dangerous for us if we stay trapped in it for too long, is actually harmful to resolving the issues and moving on anyway. Let's look at how and what we can do about this, because ultimately understanding this reaction and finding a way to govern it, to manage it, is the key to resilience and resilience training. So there's a 3-step framework we're going to look at. It all starts with recognizing, first of all, when you need to do something. We all have different tells, and in a moment, I'm going to share some of those tells with you, and I'm going to get you to write down on a piece of paper what your own tells are so you can recognize them in the future. Once we recognize we need to do something, we can take short-term action. This is where we will take what's called executive control, and we will reset the chemistry, the neurotransmitters and hormones that are coursing through our body. We're going to mop up the cortisol and replace it with things like serotonin, oxytocin, things like that, vasopressin, feel-good chemicals that enable us to think clearly and act efficiently and effectively. And finally, with that beautiful, clear thinking, we can start to actually resolve the issue, i.e. remove the perceived threat. That's either removing the threat or moving our perception of it as a threat. So let's start off and have a look, first of all, with recognizing. Now, remember, this is a very important one because if you don't recognize when you need to do something to take yourself out of a stress situation, then you stay trapped in a reactive mode. So here's some ideas. We've broken them down into three broad areas. What I'd like you to do is, as we go through these, note down any that are pertinent to you. I suspect there's 240 people on this virtual session. Each of you should be able to get at least 3 or 6 key ones that resonate with you, that are pertinent to you. So first of all, our behavioral signs. Have a look through that list. Think about which of these are applicable to you. Our physical signs. For me, I find it very difficult to eat. My tummy gets really, really tight. My wife is very different. She can't stop eating. We have a almost polar opposite reaction to extreme stress. Again, have a look through that list. Think about which ones relate to you. Just note them down on a piece of paper. Now, our last list, I think, is the most important one. It's the psychological ones. It's the stuff that's going on in your head. Again, have a look through that list. Think about which ones affect you. For me, it's like big barriers come down. They become locked down, and I want to remove everyone, distance myself from everyone. Now, everyone is different. That's okay. Make the list that works for you. And above that list, what I'd like you to do now is to write the word alert, ideally in capital letters. Alert. When you see those things, it's time to take action. So let's look at what action we can take. And that's where we get to our next section, responding. We need a way to reset those chemicals, to try and calm ourselves, and to have that as ideally an automatic habit where possible. So we're going to look at 5 techniques that work almost instantly. These are practical things that work very, very quickly. By the way, at the end of this, we'll mention very briefly 6 things that don't work instantly, but can build longer term resilience when you practice them. Things like, going for walks in nature and meditation. For now, though, what I want to do is I want to take you on 5 quick exercises that will help you gain control. And this first one is the good old favorite, good old fashioned breathing and pulse control. So the way this works is simply you take good, long, slow, deep breaths. We're going to try it together in a moment. First of all, I'm going to tell you how it works. And it's all to do with something I mentioned earlier called the vagus nerve. I don't know whether you remember, I said that the lungs actually send a message to the brain. The heart does too, via the vagus nerve. If your lungs are going really, really fast, it tells your brain that your lungs are going really, really fast. And the brain thinks there's got to be a reason for this. Maybe we're in panic mode. Maybe I should make the heart speed up as well. What you can do, though, is you can start to control that signal by deliberately slowing your breath. So it really works as simply as this. Everyone, all we're going to do is with the animation as well. So start to inhale. Now, the beautiful thing about this is just doing it 2 or 3 times can change how you start to feel. And remember, it changes how you start to feel by changing the biochemistry in your body. That's just how powerful you can be. You can exert executive control over your own systems. And let's look at another way that you can do this as well. This one I always find amusing, but I love that it works. And this next one is all about stance. Now, this is backed up by lots of different studies that show how we're sitting, how we're standing, how we're lying affects how we're thinking. By the way, if you would like to be a little bit more creative, try going into the traditional thinker pose. For some reason, and we don't know why, but for some reason, this helps us come up with slightly more ways that you can use a house brick than if you were just standing or sitting normally. It's a standard test, by the way. How many different ways can you find to use a house brick? Standing strong changes how you're feeling. And one of the things I love about this one is it can be done subtly in the company of others without them ever realizing as well. In general, here's what we're trying to do. Keep your back straight, your chin up, and make sure your facial expression is all about you are in control. Now, if you want to stand up right now, back straight, chest strong, chin up, put your hands on your hips maybe, and just think about how you feel. It is amazing how well this works. Another little experiment that we encourage people to do, by the way, with posture is to walk through a busy station, when we do have busy stations, standing as tall as you can, and watch how people get out of your way. Then crunch in on yourself, and you'll start to feel less confident, and you'll notice people don't get out of the way. It's quite amazing to see people's responses to how you carry yourself. By the way, top tip, don't do what we call a Theresa May. Don't get trained in this and then really exaggerate it so you stand in front of the nation, really wide pose, looking a little bit silly. This is just about subtle stuff. Back straight, chin up, eyes forward, you're in control. That's all. And the beautiful thing is it works and you can do it quite subtly as well. Our next one. Imagery and visualization. So we're just going to stay with a fixed image first of all. You need to find the image that works for you. Everyone's different, but just looking at an image can provoke memories and thoughts, which then trigger loads of lovely chemical releases such as oxytocin and serotonin. By the way, one of the things that serotonin does is it mops up and absorbs cortisol. Actually, it's quite a complex reaction. There's lots of different things going on, but in simple terms, serotonin, oxytocin, vasopressin, these are all chemicals that make us feel good. They make us feel loved. They make us feel secure. So here's one that makes me feel loved. An image of myself and my little girl about to do a wave rider experience. Highly recommend it. It's brilliant. Pictures of your kids are great at calming you. Well, at least they are for most people. It could be that images of your teenage children are the last thing you need to calm down. Perhaps for you then, actually, really, it's a picture of your favorite holiday. And for me, by the way, it's all about the mountains in the background. That's what does it for me. Imagining myself snowboarding down a mountain and viewing that mountain scenery. So I either have being with my family, in particular my eldest daughter, or being on a mountain. I wonder what your image is that works for you. Is it a beach, forest scene, being in your garden, being with loved ones? But find the imagery that works for you and have it on your phones, on your laptop, have it easily available. And anytime you get one of those alert points where you think, crikey, I need to change my physiology a little bit here, look at that picture, embrace it a little bit. And even more powerfully, we can use visualization. So this is me. Absolutely is. Trouble is, I'm just turned 43 when that picture was taken. I was 41, and I can assure you that just a few seconds after that picture was taken, I had my face covered in snow as I absolutely planted into the ground. But here's the thing, it makes me feel brilliant just thinking about that. So we're going to do an exercise together. I'm going to invite you, first of all, to think of something that you love doing. Maybe it's a place you love being. Maybe it's people you like being with. Maybe it's cycling. Maybe it's skiing. Maybe it's being in the bath. Try and keep it so it's legal. Other than that, anything that you want. What do you like doing that makes you feel great. And I want you to write that in just one word on your piece of paper, please. Just one nice big bold word about what you love doing. Here's what we're going to do next. We're going on a little journey into visualizing that particular thing. So here we go. First of all, I want you to bring up an image of you doing the thing that you love doing. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to make that image bigger, stronger, bolder. Step into the image. Make it more vibrant, add some sounds. What can you hear when you're doing that thing? What's the soundscape? And if you can, add smells and tastes. Make the image even more vibrant, turn up the color contrast one more time, step in even bolder. And by now you should feel pretty calm, good, in control and relaxed. And all that is coming from the powerful chemistry coursing through your body that's triggered by visualization. So visualization is an incredibly powerful thing. For me, I'm a scientist at heart. I like physics, I like psychology. But visualization changes the chemistry in our brains. That's how it works. There is biology in play here, and it's quite wonderful and beautiful how it works. Okay, so that's imagery and visualization, very powerful techniques. They can be combined together as well, by the way. We're going to have a look at that in a bit when we look at music and video, but we'll do that one last. Our next one that we're going to look at instead is reaffirming your purpose. Now, in times of toughness, some of the most powerful things we can do, some of the things that give us the greatest level of instant resilience, is to remember why we are doing it. Why do you put up with the job that you don't like? Why do you put up with the person that frustrates you? There needs to be a reason. There needs to be a purpose behind this. Reaffirming your purpose, reaffirming the purpose of your team can give resilience to all as well. Maybe you do this because you need a mortgage to pay. Maybe you do this because you want to role model powerful and positive behaviors to your children. Maybe you do this because you love holidays and you need to pay for them. Whatever it is, reaffirm your purpose. Keep it in mind. Remember why you're doing this. Now, this comes from some really lovely and quite old research, by the way, from an amazing and interesting psychologist called Viktor Frankl. Now, Frankl's story was he was caught up in the Second World War and ended up in Auschwitz. While he was there, he realized that although everyone seemed to be suffering the same kind of horrors, some people seem to be more resilient than others. They seem to be able to cope with it a little bit better. And he noticed those people all had one thing in common. They had purpose. For some of them, they thought that they were being tested by God. It was a religious purpose. For some of them, there was no religion going on. They needed to stay alive for their little brother or their mother or their whoever it was. But having a purpose, having a reason to fight, can give you strength when you really need it. So I just invite you to have a think about your purpose. Maybe later after this session, maybe tomorrow morning, have a chat with your team about their wider combined purpose. It can really excite a team and it can build in them lovely innate resilience, understanding what they're trying to do and why the hell it matters. Okay, that's a little bit on purpose. Let's have a quick look now at music and video. We're going to try a little experiment here. I'm not sure whether it's going to work, but we're going to give it a little go. While I'm setting this up, what I want you to do is I want you to think about what is your favorite piece of music? What gets you in a really good mood? Is it Queen? Is it Spandau Ballet? Is it something a lot more modern and updated? It doesn't matter what it is. It only matters that you can identify. So write down on your pads now for me, if you can, and have a little think about what is my favorite piece of music, what works for me. Okay, right, I'm just going to halt sharing my screen for a second. Let's see if we can get a video playing. We're not sure whether it's going to work or not. Let's give it a quick go. Let's see what we can do here. Not to worry. So on the screen is a freeze frame of one of my favorite videos. It's from a series called People Are Awesome. These are wonderful because they have very, very upbeat music and tracks, which is great stuff, combined with images of people doing amazing, brilliant things. And I often find when I'm in a little low point, let's say I'm on a plane traveling across to somewhere in Europe, I'm going away from my family, I'm doing some work that I enjoy, but even so, it's 8 o'clock in the evening and I'm on a damn EasyJet flight. Having something like this playing on my laptop just lifts the mood straight away. Using your favorite music, particularly when it's combined with some images, can be a brilliant and wonderful thing. So just bear in mind that it's quite possible to change your mood in quite a big way. Actually, I'm just going to have one more go at sharing this video. Lovely. I think we might just be able to do this. Excellent. So here we go, everyone. You might want to turn your volume down a tiny little bit for this, by the way. I'm going to play you 37 seconds of one of my favorite videos. Fingers crossed. Let's see how this works. Okay, not sure if that worked. If it did, you managed to get a little glimpse of a nice upbeat, high interactive video there. If it didn't, then don't worry about it. Yeah, a couple of messages there not working yet. Not a problem. Let's move on. So I just invite you to explore that. It's wonderful. People are awesome. Stick it in YouTube and you can get some wonderful, wonderful, uplifting music and videos combined together. So that's music and video for us as well. There are some techniques that can help you build longer term resilience. Now, I'm only going to mention these very briefly because they're not instant practical wins. However, they've all been shown to work an awful lot in terms of long-term building of resilience. And the first one is exercise. The more we do it up to a certain point, doing 3 marathons in a row, by the way, doesn't necessarily build your resilience. It has a big cost on your physical well-being. However, 1 marathon, maybe that's great. Regular running, it's brilliant. So there is a right level of exercise, and the right level of exercise is the one that gives you optimum ongoing health, i.e. moderate exercise. There's been some really interesting studies that show meditation or mindfulness, and that links in with things such as yoga as well, really good for us. First of all, we find that the immediate stress response can be dampened down a little bit. And secondly, resilience boosts, i.e. it takes less time to lessen that stress response and return to a normal. So these are really good things to build into habits for. Now, if you're someone who is lying awake at night worrying, try setting priorities and making a list. Such a small, simple thing, making a list, can have a big change. It often doesn't help in the first 10 seconds while you're making the list, because then you're just, my goodness, look at all these priorities I have. But the act of making a list seems to enable your brain to think, okay, I don't have to try and juggle and keep this all in my mind. I have a safety net and I know what my priorities are. So setting priorities and making a list can be a nice long-term habit to get into. Some really interesting psychology that's come out in the last few years is the impact that nature has on our mental state. Now, if you'd have told this to me a few years ago, I wouldn't have bought it. As I mentioned, I'm a scientist at heart. My base is in things like physics and psychology, but there's repeating weight of evidence that shows being in nature actively calms us down and releases those positive, good chemicals that we're talking about. Here's the thing, we don't know why. We don't understand the mechanism. So I don't want to pretend that we understand why this is working, but there are some very clear and measurable, accurately measurable results that show that having nature around you, going for a walk in nature, even just having some greenery around you, can have a positive influence on your stress response, calming it down and boosting your resilience as well. Friends, family, and pets, being with people who you love and who love you, can change the chemistry. Did you know, if you look into your dog's eyes and start stroking your dog or your bunny rabbit, you start to release oxytocin. This is often called the cuddle chemical as well. When you're with your loved ones and feeling calm and relaxed, that's the oxytocin flow. It means that we're more likely to be truthful, we feel calm, we feel relaxed. Our working complex memories are in tip-top condition at this point, by the way. You want to solve a really, really difficult problem? Go cuddle a bunny rabbit. Maybe not actually cuddle a bunny rabbit, but think about changing that chemistry in your brain. And one of the quickest, fastest, but most powerful ways to quickly change your chemistry is with some comedy. Now, comedy is so variant, it is so personalized, but you will know what works for you. Try and schedule in some comedy. At the moment, there's a whole load of virtual sessions happening, such as The Stand. So you can go on the internet and you can have a look at a live comedy show, or maybe there's a particular thing that really works for you. I can tell you that my friends and I on our locked in WhatsApp group are all sharing different memes and funny viral videos. It's just putting a smile on people's faces. And by the way, it also creates a small connection in terms of friends, family, and pets, because this is my wider friends group that's connecting as well. Okay, so there's 6 techniques. They're not ones that you can use instantly, but they're ones that you can practice and get better and better at, and they will have an ongoing impact to your resilience as well. So let's have a think about how we can resolve these issues. We've only got a few more minutes left of this virtual session, and I want to show you a few quick ways to actually start thinking about resolving. The first one is to recognize that there's always something you can control. You can't control everything around you. You can't control the economy, organizational changes, COVID-19, other people, etc. You can't control the weather, but you can control what you wear when you go outside. You can control your responses, your approaches. You can control how you respond to whatever challenge is coming your way. And that's a nice thing to bear in mind, that in any situation, there are elements that you can control and elements that you can't control. I'd invite you to quickly write down some of the elements that you can control. Always start with the can control, by the way. Only once you've completed that, have a look at the elements you can't control. You may be amazed at just how many you can influence and how many you can't influence. This technique is called the circles of influence. The more you do it, by the way, the more you realize just how much you can control. We can't control the weather. We can control how we dress for it. We can also control what kind of weather patterns we experience on a regular basis by choosing where we live. There's always something that can be done. Now, sometimes it isn't just about picking something that can be done. Sometimes it's about finding a radical solution that completely resolves or solves the issue. And that's where we can get to something beautiful called positive deviance. A few years ago, there was a book called Positivedeviance, and it followed a wonderful story by the World Health Organization. In this particular situation, there was a large famine that was happening in an East Asian country. But the organization noticed that in every village, there seemed to be a group that were surviving. They were bucking the trend. They were deviant, i.e. away from the norm, but deviant in a really positive way, hence the name Positivedeviance. What the organization realized they needed to do was to find out what these people were doing differently, how they were managing to buck the famine. Now, by the way, here's what they were doing differently. The mothers were encouraging children to eat insects. When they were going out to rice paddies, they were also picking up grubs, worms, and insects. This gave them a massive protein and nutrient boost that the other children weren't experiencing, thus enabling them to survive. Trouble is, it seemed pretty yucky. That's why the mothers had kept it quiet from the rest of the villagers what they were doing. They didn't want to be ostracized from the community. The World Health Organization realized what they needed to do was to now normalize this behavior. And this is one of the best things we can do when we're facing a novel challenge brought about by change and don't know what to do. Find the person that does. See, here's the thing, everyone. No matter what situation you are facing, the chances are that someone somewhere has faced that situation, overcome it, got the t-shirt, and then written about it on the internet. Find out what they did, and you may well help save yourself an awful lot of work, and find a brilliant solution that can work for you. Okay, now that starts to bring us to the end of this virtual session. I've just got a couple of rhetorical questions for you. Then I'm going to ask you to have a little think about how it went for you and to give your account managers some feedback. First of all, let's have a quick look at what we've covered today. So as mentioned, it was broken into two broad areas. Our first area was what resilience is and why it's important, and in particular, a focus on leading through change at the moment. What happens through change, and a couple of quick ways on how we can boost people through that transition curve, or even by passing control to them, hopefully get them to skip the transition curve completely. The 4 laws of change, and in particular that third law, if you create the change, you will embrace it. If the change happens to you, you will resist it. Our second element, or second half of this virtual WebEx session, was the stress response. What's actually happening on a biochemical level? And then a 3-step framework for managing that response and building our resilience. And that framework was, first of all, recognize when you need to do something, and hopefully you now personally have a list of things that you can watch out for that say, okay, you know what? I need to do something here. I need to step out of this situation. I need to change what's happening because I'm not in a good place right now. The second element, respond. How you step out of that situation, what you can do, the breathe deeply, the looking at an image of a loved one, the imagining doing something that you absolutely love, the changing your stance, the listening to a piece of music for 20 seconds, or watching a video that puts a smile on your face for 20 seconds. The instant response situations. We also had a look at a couple of longer term resilience building examples as well. And then finally, the resolution piece as well. There's an old adage which is change the things you cannot accept and accept the things you cannot change. And the resolution, the resolving, is ultimately about that. Find who made that change beforehand. Find out what they did and copy it. Or understand the things that you can control, i.e. you, your responses, your reactions, and understand the things that you can't control and accept that some things can't be controlled. So we have covered an awful lot together in this 60 minutes. Now, I ask you to take notes. This is all for you. Again, we will send out a summary, 1-page summary for you. Your account manager will do that for you and get that out to you. That will just help to embed some of this learning. But first of all, just think about what are you taking away from this session, and has it been useful? And we would like you to share that with your account managers as well. If you can, when you do speak to them, just let them know what the key thing was that you took away from this session. It's all about helping you, so hopefully you have, and was it useful for you as well? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to an end. The timing, it looks like, has been pretty much perfect as well. So I'm just going to leave you with one final thought. It comes back to that there's things that you can influence and things that you can't. There was one thing that was noted by particularly resilient people, which was how they viewed a challenge. People who were deemed as having low mental toughness and low resilience viewed the challenge as a threat to the status quo. People who had, or were rated as having, high mental toughness and high resilience viewed the challenge as an opportunity to test themselves. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Now, while that's not actually strictly true, it's a pretty good adage to live our lives by. Okay, everyone, thank you very much. We've just gone to 5:01. Hopefully we've got some questions that have popped in, so we'll gather those up and come back to you as well. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Feel free to log off now, give some feedback back to your account managers as well. I've been Nick Winston. Hope you've enjoyed the ILX presentation. We've got 3 more to come for you on each Tuesday as we go forwards. And I'm now going to halt the recording.